Your net worth is $650 million. Your mother called last Thursday to ask if you needed money. Not because anything happened, not because you mentioned a single word about it, just because she noticed your coat has a fraying cuff you never replaced, and you haven't taken a real vacation in 3 years. And the last time you came home for Thanksgiving, you drove the same dented sedan you drove the year before. So she called. She offered quietly, the way she does, with a careful softness that told you she'd been sitting with the thought for a while before she picked up the phone. You told her you were fine. She didn't fully believe you, and the part you've never figured out how to explain, even to yourself, is that you didn't correct her. You let it sit there between you on the line, this assumption that you were just getting by, because telling her the truth would require a conversation neither of you is ready for. This is what $650 million actually looks like from the outside. It looks like nothing at all. It starts in a break room, not a boardroom. You were 24, working logistics coordination for a regional distributor, $41,000 a year, the kind of job that comes with a badge and a cubicle, and nothing resembling a 5-year plan. There was a vending machine by the loading dock that jammed constantly. One afternoon, the guy who restocked it mentioned, almost bored, that he ran 40 of these across the metro, and it paid him whether he showed up or not. You didn't sleep well that night, not because of the money he never actually told you, but because of the shape of the idea. A machine that ran without him. You had $2,400 saved. You bought a used vending machine for $600 and placed it in a laundromat 2 blocks from your apartment in exchange for a cut of the take. First month, it cleared $41. Your coworker spent more than that on a Friday night out. You didn't quit anything. You bought a second machine, then a third. You told nobody, not because it was a secret worth protecting yet, but because $41 felt too small to mention, and by the time it stopped being small, silence had already become the natural setting. By 27, you owned 9 machines and a route you ran on Saturday mornings in a car that smelled faintly of quarters. You'd started noticing other things the way you'd noticed that vending machine. A self-storage lot with a hand-painted sign nobody had updated in a decade. A laundromat run by a tired man named Souza who mentioned, almost in passing, that he'd been meaning to sell for 2 years and never gotten around to it. You asked Souza questions nobody else had bothered to ask him. What his lease looked like, which machines broke most, whether he'd ever consider financing the sale himself. He said nobody had ever put it that plainly to him before. 3 weeks later, you put down $6,000, everything the vending route had made, plus what you'd saved. And Souza carried the rest out of the laundromat's own cash flow. You were 27 years old, and you owned a business you couldn't have afforded outright on 5 years of logistics paychecks. That was the first rule you learned, the one nobody says out loud. The money was never the point. The gap was. The space between what a tired owner thinks something is worth and what it's actually worth to someone patient enough to ask the right question. Your mother noticed the car wasn't changing around this time. Your sister asked, half joking, if everything was okay at work. You said yes, everything was fine, which was true in every way that mattered, and false in the one way that would have required an explanation you weren't ready for. By 31, you owned 4 laundromats, a growing vending route managed almost entirely by someone you'd hired, and a small stake in a self-storage lot bought at a county auction nobody else bothered attending. Net worth crossed $2 million. You didn't buy anything to market. You stood in a grocery store aisle, checked the number on your phone, put it back in your pocket, and bought the store brand cereal like you always did. At 33, a contact from your old logistics job mentioned a regional commercial cleaning company, an owner in his 60s named Halloran who wanted out and didn't know how to find a buyer who wouldn't gut it for parts. You met him at a diner on a Thursday morning. He said the things sellers always eventually say, that he just needed to know his people would be okay. You told him you'd make sure of it. The deal closed in 3 weeks. You kept every employee. Revenue crossed $1.4 million within 2 years. Thin margins, reliable as rent. You still hadn't told your family anything. There was never a natural moment. I bought a cleaning company wasn't a sentence that dropped easily into a Sunday dinner, and the longer you waited, the more the window closed closed, until it wasn't a secret you were keeping so much as a fact that simply existed outside the shared version of your life. At 36, you bought your first apartment building, 8 units, from a widow who'd let the rents fall years below market because raising them felt unkind to tenants she'd known for a decade. You brought rents up gradually, fixed the roof, replaced wiring that hadn't been touched since the Carter administration. Within 2 years, income nearly tripled, while the building genuinely improved for the people living in it. You started repeating the pattern. Not a formula exactly, just the same gap, again and again, waiting patiently for tired owners nobody else was paying attention to. At 38, your net worth crossed $20 million. You were at your desk on a Tuesday afternoon when the accountant's summary landed in your inbox. You read it once, put the phone face down, and went back to a spreadsheet about vendor pricing for the cleaning company. Your mother called that same week to ask if you were eating properly. She'd read something online about men your age living alone. You told her you were fine. You made a joke about the cereal. She laughed and said she worried about you sometimes. You said she didn't need to. She said she always had and always would, and that was just how it worked. What nobody tells you about building this quietly is that the silence compounds the same way the money does. Every year that passes without the conversation makes the conversation harder. Not because anyone would be angry. You've turned this over more times than you can count, and you genuinely don't believe they would be, but because the gap between their version of you and the actual one has grown wide enough that correcting it now would feel less like an update and more like a confession. Reveals carry weight. They rearrange things. They make the people around you recalibrate who they've been dealing with, and that recalibration, however small, changes the texture of everything that comes after it. At 41, you bought a highway billboard portfolio, ground leases across 3 counties, assembled quietly over 14 months through separate brokers, none of whom ever saw the full picture. At 44, a regional pest control business from a man named Ferris who wanted to retire near his grandkids. At 46, 2 municipal parking structures acquired through a tax auction nobody else showed up to. None of it made headlines. None of it needed to. Every deal ran the same way the vending machines had. Small, unglamorous, solving a problem nobody was watching closely enough to notice was profitable. By 49, your net worth crossed $200 million. You remember exactly where you were, standing in a hardware store aisle comparing 2 shades of caulk for a leaking storage unit when the quarterly summary came through. You read it twice, the way you read something when part of you assumes you've misread a decimal. Nobody in the store knew. The cashier who rang up your $6 tube of caulk didn't know. You drove home in the same sedan, windows down, and didn't feel triumphant. You felt something quieter, closer to recognition, the same feeling you'd had the first month the vending machine cleared $41, except now it had a lot more zeros behind it. Your best friend since college, Desmond, came to you around this time with a real opportunity, a small commercial building in a neighborhood he understood completely, the kind of deal that doesn't come up twice. He needed $90,000. He had $22,000. You could have sent it before the call ended. It would not have registered as a decision on your balance sheet. You didn't. Instead, you sat at his kitchen table for 6 Saturdays in a row, walking through lease comps, exit scenarios, the terms of a CDFI loan he didn't know existed. He secured the financing 7 weeks later without a dollar from you. He called the night he got the keys, said he didn't know how you knew all that. You said you read a lot. He said you were weird. The building's performing now. You never told him what you could have written the check for instead. That wasn't modesty. It was understanding the story needed to be his. There are rooms in your life nobody gets invited into. That part never gets easier. Not the secrecy itself. You made peace with that years ago. It's the specific weight of sitting across from people you love, knowing you could remove an entire problem in 60 seconds, and knowing that doing so would be the wrong thing to do. There was another moment, years earlier, that taught you this the hard way. A friend from your first job, someone you'd known since the vending machine days, came to you with a plan in the kind of belief that makes you want to fund it on the spot. You wrote the check that time. The money was gone within 16 months, spent on things that looked like a business, but never quite became one. The friendship came back eventually, but quieter, a scar on it neither of you names out loud. What you learn from that, slowly and expensively, is that money handed to someone who isn't structurally ready for it doesn't build anything. It accelerates whatever is already there, and the friendship is the collateral when it goes wrong. That's the lesson that shaped every Saturday you've spent at kitchen tables since, walking people through their own numbers instead of simply writing theirs away. At 53, the portfolio had grown into something that would take a full afternoon to explain to anyone outside your accountant's office. Laundromats, storage facilities, the cleaning company, the billboards, 4 apartment buildings, a stake in a regional trucking outfit that quietly served routes your first employer still used, decades after you'd left. Net worth crossed $400 million. Your father, at Thanksgiving that year, mentioned he'd seen a good deal on a used truck and asked carefully, in the tone he uses for things he's been thinking about a while, whether you needed help with a down payment on something newer than the sedan in his driveway. You appreciated it. You told him the car was fine. He looked at it the way someone looks at something they've been quietly concerned about for longer than they've said out loud. There's a question underneath all of this that you've spent more time on than almost any other. If you're not spending it, if nobody knows, if the life from the outside looks like someone getting by and not much more, then what exactly have you been building toward?
The answer isn't the one you'd have given at 24. Back then, you were just trying to interrupt a pattern you could already see playing out around you. Raises consumed by upgraded lives, promotions that changed the number but never the feeling, a decade that left everyone more comfortable and no more free. By 38, you understood what you were actually after. It was never the number. It was the absence of weight that arrives once the number is large enough. The way a medical bill stops being an emergency. The way a bad quarter doesn't rearrange your nervous system. The way you can make a decision based on what you actually want instead of what you can currently afford to want. That's what $650 million bought you. Not things, not status, not the easier conversation at the dinner table. Just the quiet fact that money no longer manages you. You manage it. The number itself arrived the way it always does, without ceremony. You were 58, standing in a laundromat you still visit sometimes out of habit more than necessity, watching a dryer finish its cycle, when your accountant's email landed. Subject line, Q3 summary, final. No exclamation point. She's never once used one. You read it, standing under fluorescent light with the faint smell of detergent in the air, a customer 2 machines down, folding shirts, entirely unaware that the man beside her could buy the building, the block, and most of the neighborhood around it without noticing the dent it left. You put the phone away, finished your coffee, and drove home in the same sedan with the same fraying floor mats you'd meant to replace for years. You thought, driving home, about the version of yourself at 24, standing by a jammed vending machine on a loading dock, doing math at a kitchen table with no particular reason to believe any of it would go anywhere. You thought about every boring Friday reinvested instead of spent, every deal nobody saw, every conversation where you let someone else explain something to you that you'd understood for years, just to keep the room comfortable. He would not believe this, you thought, not for a second, and there was something almost funny in that, standing in a laundromat with detergent in the air, thinking about a version of yourself who couldn't have imagined the shape any of this would eventually take. Your mother called again last week. Same gentle concern, same careful softness. She'd been talking to a neighbor whose son had just bought a big new house, doing well by all appearances, and she wanted to check in, make sure you weren't being too hard on yourself, that you knew there was no race. You listened to the whole thing. You told her things were good, that she didn't need to worry, that you were exactly where you wanted to be. She said she was glad to hear it. She said she'd always believed you'd figure it out. You said thank you, and you meant it completely. You hung up and sat in the same apartment you've lived in for 11 years. Same furniture, same neighborhood, same view out the same window you've looked at through dozens of acquisitions, decades of quarterly summaries, and one spreadsheet that now reads $650 million distributed across properties, businesses, and a brokerage account that hasn't required your daily attention in years. The The sedan is in the lot downstairs. The coat with the fraying cuff is on the hook by the door. And not one person in your life, not your mother, not your sister, not your father who once offered to help with a truck down payment, has any idea what the spreadsheet actually says.